Hey everybody, this is my 40-gallon waterfall tank, and today we're going to take another trip around the world. We got a lot to go over today, so hunker down and get ready. I just got distracted by something before we even really get started on the video. I never noticed this before. I don't know if it's been there all the while or if it's something that's developed recently. If you'll notice this line in the black plastic, and I know it looks awful, it's just literally a trash bag hanging over that, but if you look at this line, it looks almost, at first glance, I thought it was almost where like solvent had gotten on the plastic and sort of shriveled it up or something. But then I almost wondered if there's like a root growing underneath of it from something. If you use your imagination a little bit, it almost looks like a canyon system as viewed from space on a foreign planet. But I don't know what it is. And I don't know if it's been there before and I've just never noticed it, but it just popped into my line of vision as I was getting ready to shoot this video, so that distracted me before we even really got started on all the stuff I really want to cover in this video today. So let's get started on the real meat of the video, and that is, first of all, look how pale my daylily is getting here. Now, I don't know whether that is because it should have gone dormant months ago, or if it's because there's so few nutrients in the water that it's really just needs a good feeding. So probably doesn't do much, but I do have some Flourish, and it's for micronutrients. It's this stuff. Well, put my thumb right over the label. It's this stuff. I use it from time to time when I think about it, but it's very rarely that I do, and that's why I never bother with it, because I can never really remember or bother to remember about it. So today I put a capful in there, and just out of curiosity to see what impact it had on the tank, I tested the total dissolved solids, and I got 498 parts per million. I put a big overflowing capful, we'll call it a capful and a half, in there, and then I tested the dissolved solids again, and I got 523. So that is 25 parts per million more, but I kind of forgot that I had done that and was going to do that test, and I did the second test after I topped the tank off, and I put about a good 2 inches of water in there. Although that looks like a lot compared to the tank. I put a good 2 inches of water in there, if you want to do it that way. And so that itself could have added those 25 parts per million into the tank. So I don't know how valid that test was. And honestly, going from 498 to 525 or 523 on one of those TDS meters, if I'd have swirled it around or dipped it in a different part of the tank, I might have gotten, 5 or 10, parts one way or the other. So I'm not going to say that did a whole lot. It obviously added something to the tank, but not a ton, and I seriously doubt it's going to be enough to make that daylily turn nice and green again. Again, this isn't what this plant's designed to do. It's supposed to go dormant and be in frozen ground, frostbitten ground all winter, and then next spring and summer it'll come back. But I'm just forcing it to stay in, temperate, warm temperatures, and we're going to see what happens. I'm also giving it consistent 12 hours a day sunlight, day after day after day, month after month, so that's probably taking its toll on it. So it'll be interesting to see how long it lasts before it finally peters out. Otherwise, on this tank, nothing really to talk about. I just topped the tank off, as I said, didn't bother with the water change. I did one of those not too long ago. I wiped down the outside of the glass, but not the inside. And as usual, the mulm and everything is starting to build up again. I don't have a way to really get the mulm out of this tank except for gravel vacuuming it, but that's kind of how I designed this tank and set it up. So again, we can talk about filtration and what different types of filtration and water circulation and all that kind of stuff do, because you can set tanks up in all sorts of different ways. This tank is certainly filtered. I just don't have the same type of filtration that would pick that mulm up and keep it swirled around in the water long enough to get caught up in a filter somewhere. It just settles to the bottom, and then I have to go in and manually remove it. But as far as the biofiltration and water circulation and gas exchange and all that stuff, this tank runs like a champ. It's fine. I don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. It's just a matter of getting in there and vacuuming it out from time to time. This tank, I don't even worry about doing that. This tank just does its thing. It rolls over and keeps on keeping on. Probably need to get in there soon and get some of that duckweed out of there. That's about the one thing I do actually do to this tank, is get in there and clean out the duckweed when it starts getting too thick. And when the water starts getting low, I top it off. And every once in a blue moon, I mean literally maybe once every 9 months or something, I'll actually do a real water change where I'll actually remove some water. Excuse me a moment. And then I will just go back to forgetting about it, leave it alone. This tank just ticks over like a clock. Now, I also have deep sand in it, so it denitrifies, and I usually have no nitrates in the tank, and the TDS in the tank is through the roof, but it's always been through the roof, so I don't ever worry about it. Again, this tank just ticks over like a clock. I did see some shrimp in there the other day. I mentioned in a recent video that I was going to check to see if I still had any shrimp in there, and indeed I saw 2 of them. One was larger than the other, so they are probably even still breeding in there, believe it or not. And again, this is just sort of one of those tanks I ignore. I never really honestly pay much attention to it. I never really pay much attention to it at all, to be honest with you, but it does make for a nice little footnote at the bottom of the waterfall. If you don't pay too close attention to it, it just sort of looks like the water makes its way all the way down, and we get the last little bit of it trickling down here, even though these are 2 completely separate systems. But I designed it that way. I wanted it to look that way, so there you go. All right, let me get all the lights shut down on this one so it's not glaring up all the rest of the tanks. As I said, we got a long way to go. I'll be really surprised if I can wrap this one up under 30 minutes. In fact, I'm not expecting to at all. So, getting around to my 29 miscellaneous, we actually do have something to talk about in this tank today. I got in there to wipe the glass down in order to shoot this video. I was actually doing some prep work today as I was preparing for this video. And the water was still really warm. And I could have sworn I turned the heater down last time I was in there. I've talked about this recently, how warm this tank is, and that's why it always seems to need to be topped off. And so while I was in there wiping the glass down, I saw the heater come on. And I thought, well, now would be a perfect time to dial it back. I'll just dial it back slowly until it goes off, and then I'll dial it back a little more, and that will bring the temperature down a few degrees. And I dialed it all the way till it stopped, and nothing happened. So I dialed it the other direction all the way till it stopped, and nothing happened. So long story short, I pulled the heater out to see where I was dialing it. It was turned around. I couldn't actually see the markings on it when I was turning the knob, so I didn't know whether I was going up or down. So when I pulled it out to have a better look at it, the first thing I noticed was little droplets of water and some condensation and stuff all on the inside of the glass. And no matter which way I turned it, all the way up or all the way down, it was not shutting off. And so that is very much a faulty heater. If you ever have a heater that has water inside the glass, you need to just go ahead and unplug it. Don't stick your hands in the tank or anything. You probably would be okay, but don't do that until you've unplugged it. And then let the heater sit in the tank for 10 or 15 minutes until it's cooled down. I pulled this one out immediately. It hadn't been on very long since, as soon as it came on, I started tinkering with it. And yet, even then, when I pulled it out, I saw steam coming off of it for several seconds until all the water evaporated off of it. And then I could even feel how hot the glass was getting. So I just set it down and left it alone and let it cool down. If the glass cracked, I didn't care, because this is going in the trash. Now in this case, I'm going to cut the cord off so that nobody will take this out of my trash and use it. And yes, depending on where you live, people probably do go through your trash, and they are your trash people. I actually used to work for my local trash company. In fact, I used to be my own trash man, and I know a lot of those people in those routes root through people's trash. You'd be amazed at what you can find out about somebody by digging through their trash. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody found that and tried to use it. If they say, oh, this is a perfectly good heater, I'm going to go ahead and plug it in. So I'll go ahead and cut the plug off. I'm also one of those people that cuts the plugs off of things in case I ever need to use a plug for something. Believe it or not, I actually have on many occasions reused old plugs. Anyway, probably more information than you need to know about me, but there you go. I got no heater in this tank. I don't know if I'm going to replace it or not, but that does solve the mystery of why this tank has always been so warm. So fortunately, the heater did not seem to have stuck on. It was intermittent because it was not on when I started wiping the glass down. It came on while I was wiping the glass down. And so if it had just simply come on and stayed on, I probably would have cooked all the fish in this tank. And that's just something that can happen in your aquarium. These heaters fail regularly. Anything that's got a heating element in it is going to fail. It's just it's going to fail. It gets warm. You know, the more that thing heats up and cools down, it's going to fail someday. You just can't make metal heating elements with switches and stuff like that don't ultimately fail one day. And if you're lucky, it'll fail by simply not coming on. It'll fail off. If it fails on and you don't catch it, it can cook your tank. So if you really want that degree of safety, you need to put a temperature alarm on your tank, or you need to really check your tank temperature every few hours, because if it does stick on, it literally within a matter of a few hours, it will raise your tank temperature to alarming levels. So that's one of those things you got to worry about in the hobby. Fortunately, no issues with this. And again, don't know if I'm even going to replace it or not. The room temperature down here is mid 70s, and that's plenty warm for any of the fish I got in this tank. Other than that, not a lot going on in here. I did lose my angelfish in this tank recently. For those of you who don't know that, it got stuck down between the rocks here, and I think it got wedged in there so tight it couldn't open its gills anymore, and it simply suffocated or something, because it was really wedged in there tight. I had to move the rocks physically to get it out of there, but no more angelfish in this tank, unfortunately. Other than that, I simply wiped down the glass, topped off the tank, and didn't even bother to mess with the filter. As you can see, this tank almost always has that backflow through the middle, and of course it still does today. So there you go. That's what's going on with my 29. We get to my 55-gallon gourami tank, and one of the first things I want to mention, other than the fact that I did a water change recently, I added some floating water Sprite over here. That's what this is. I just wiped the glass down today, again, in preparation for this video, and I shot a video recently where I said I think I added some red tiger lotus, and that would be this stuff down here, and I don't believe that is red tiger lotus at all. I was not so sure when I put it in there, because it doesn't look like red tiger lotus. You can go find that video. Just look at my gourami tank. I think it was my gourami tank. I don't know, whatever. I think what that is Apanagitan. And I was scratching my head about it because I vaguely remember getting some Apanagitan one time, but I have no idea where it went or what tank I put it in. And yet I had that stuff that was floating at first, what I thought was attached to one of the stalks on my red tiger lotus. And when I went over there to pull it out, I realized it wasn't actually attached. It was just kind of floating in the same corner. And so probably not red tiger lotus. It was not attached to the stem, despite what I first thought. And so I was still scratching my head about, where did the Apanagitan come from? How did I have a free floating bulb, as though the stuff has multiplied or bred, you know, divided, whatever you want to say, in the tank? I don't know where this stuff is. So if I forget to mention it when we get around to it, look in the bottom right hand corner of my 125, down where you see the red tiger lotus growing, and you'll see a great big old Apanagitan plant that's growing with the tiger lotus. It's growing right in and among it. Like, you could hardly even tell that it's sitting in there until you look closely. So all this time I had no idea I even had that Apanagitan growing in my 125. It's one of my skunk loaches. I don't have too many of those left. I really liked those skunk loaches. I had them for a long time. I recommended them to a ton of people, and then it was after having them for about 2 years that I started hearing from other people that they're supposed to be really nasty, aggressive, and unpleasant loaches that bother all the other fish in the tank, and that's just never been my experience. I love my my skunk loaches. I think they're fantastic. So there you go. Anyway, I think that's Apanagitan, and again, when we get around to my 125, I'll try to remember to show you what I'm talking about. Moving on to my 55-gallon tank. Not going to spend a lot of time on this tank. If you will notice, both this tank and this tank look a lot brighter. That is not because of anything I've done fancy with the water change or wiping the glass down or removing tannins or anything. It's simply making an adjustment to my lights. Not going to go over anything in this tank really, because I haven't done anything to this tank. I didn't even wipe the glass down. There's a look at my mustachioned pleco sticking its nose out there. Let's see if we can focus again. So didn't do anything to this tank, nothing to talk about. I can't really even think of anything to mention. You know, blah, blah, blah. We got cyanobacteria in there. I'm going to shoot a video one of these days about it, and we'll get to that whenever we get around to it. I'm not in any hurry. Got some new growth going on my nubius. We got some flowers, or whatever you want to call those things, bracts or whatever they are, just about growing up and out of the water. And that's about all that's going on in this tank. But if you're wondering about the lighting, as I was alluding to a moment ago, that is simply because I've got my light fixtures pulled forward. These have a row of LEDs here and a row of LEDs here. And when I have to open the lid, it winds up pushing that light fixture back. So for my everyday uses and purposes, the light fixture sits back here like this. And it puts this row of LEDs right down that center bracket. And so most of the time when we come in here and I do those spur of the moment type videos, you see the tank looking like this, because this is how it normally looks, and that just allows me easy access when I come in here to feed the fish and everything. I can open the lids. So that's why the tanks look so bright today. Now, of course, this tank did just get the big water change, and that's why that's looking so nice and bright and cheery. This one, I just moved the light forward, and that's why it was looking so bright. Moving on to my 40 breeder here. Again, nothing really going on. This is another one of the tanks that I did nothing about today, and there's not really anything to talk about. There's hardly any fish left in this tank. I think I got 1 or 2 Rasbora hets. There might be 1 glow light tetra left. I have a few... yeah, there's a glow light tetra right smack in the middle of the tank. It's blending in with that reddish looking cyanobacteria. I've got a few plecos in here, little rubber lips, and then I've got 4 Siamese algae eaters, and then I've got that rainbow fish in the back. And that's it. That's all that's left in this tank anymore. So, I don't know. I know I've said this a million times. I say this every time we get around to this tank. One of these days, whenever, you know, I get to be in my bonnet and I get in the mood to do it, I'll get in here and, you know, I'll get in here and we'll do something with this tank. But I got so much emotional, you know, sentimental attachment and value in this tank. I hate to do anything to it. But at this point, it's almost getting so overgrown, it doesn't even look like the original tank I put together. So I kind of need to get in there and do something. At the very least, we need to get in there and do a big chemi-clean treatment or something and just get all the grunge cleaned out of it and just give it a good once-over and at least give it a haircut. You know, if nothing else, I don't need to rescape it necessarily, but I need to thin it out or something. So anyway, like I said, we'll get around to it when we get around to it. This is my hobby, not my job. It's, you know, everything's fine in there. It's just, you know, just one of those things I'll get around to doing when I feel like getting around to doing it. So I'm not in any hurry to do it. I'm not, you know, pressed. I don't have some kind of deadline. As long as the fish are good and healthy, you know, the water's fine. I do my water changes and everything. I'm not too worried about it. So, like I said, we'll get to it when we get to it. Moving on to my 125 gallon New World tank. We did a lot of work to this one today. In fact, I shot a video about deep cleaning my gravel, and you can see how bright and clean that gravel looks. I did as much as I could get the gravel vac down into. Of course, I've got so much rocks and woodwork and decor and everything in this tank, it's impossible to do all of the gravel. But if you can remove a bunch of it, it's, you know, that's never going to be a bad idea. So today was the day I got in there. I did a really deep cleaning, serious gravel vac. I also went through and, you know, ran my fingers through all of the plants and the roots here on my water sprite there, and I got all the detritus knocked loose out of that. I went through and did all underneath of the bushes as much as I could and so on and so forth. I got a ton of mulm and detritus and crud and stuff like that out of here. And so I did shoot a video where we were doing the deep gravel vacuuming here. So that will be a video. If I think about it, I'll put a card to it, or you can check out my New World Tank playlist. And then I also decided at the last minute, while I wasn't going to worry about it because the water was flowing just fine out of here, I said I don't need to worry about the filter. But then I said, well, I got so much time to wait for this tank to refill. I did a really big water change. I decided I would do a filter change too, and oh my goodness, was that tank filthy. I shot a video about that too, and I honestly wish I had kept the camera rolling or picked it up again for the latter part. I showed you the first 2 trays of it, and they were just beyond anything I've ever seen personally. I've never had a filter be that dirty before, and yet when I got to the bottom, oh, the bottom made the top look like it was no big deal. I mean, the bottom of that thing was almost solid sludge. And I realized that the reason the water was still flowing properly was because as the bottom of the filter goes down, you know, it's got the tube that goes in with the little swirlies, and then the idea is there's a gap at the bottom. The water spreads out across the bottom, and then it rises up through all your layers of filters and everything. But when you looked at it, you could see it was a solid mat of that paste. And then there was a couple of holes right next to on the outside of the channel. There were a couple of holes where the water was just basically going down and going straight back up through channels it had cut. Like if you've ever seen a reservoir or something where the water is drained and there's water running through the silt, the way it cuts a channel through the silt. That's what this looked like. It had cut a channel through the silt and was just, the water was flowing in and just flowing right back up through it and right back out the top. So that's how water was still flowing through a filter that was, for all intents and purposes, packed solid with sludge. I mean, again, check out the video. I'll try to remember to attach a card here, at least for that video. If not for the gravel vacuuming video, maybe I'll put one for both, whatever, I don't know. But it was definitely worth looking at. I've never seen a canister filter that nasty and disgusting before. So we got that changed. We did the huge gravel vac. We got all the glass wiped down, and I did a big water change. I did probably more than 50% of the linear length of the tank here, top to bottom. So we went down to maybe here with the water change. I was actually just above the power head in the back. Now keep in mind, volume wise, that is much more than 50%. The only way it would be 50% at the 50% line would be if the tank was empty of fish, which displace water. The woodwork, the rocks, the gravel, all that stuff displaces water. So when you look at the tank, much more of the volume of the water is in the top portion of the tank than it is in the bottom portion. So if you go down to the 50% mark, you've removed more than 50% of the volume of the water in the tank, even though you're only about that halfway mark on the tank. So I went well below the halfway mark, and so we're going to say that was probably a 75, maybe 80% water change. I did a really big water change today. I did not actually test the nitrates after I was done such a huge water change, and I probably should have, just out of curiosity. I assume they're probably still in the red. They just always are on this tank. It's way overstocked. I really need to get in there and do something about that. But that's what we did today in preparation for this video. So that was that. I do want to shoot probably a standalone video. I know a lot of people don't watch these long-winded round the world updates, but my snail tank that basically has no filter in it anymore because it's growing the Java moss is getting a little out of control, and I need to get in there. I just topped it off today because you can see the water's barely even flowing anymore. It's flowing more than you think. And at this point, the Java moss itself is acting as a living filter. It's got snails crawling around in it, and I think it looks absolutely fantastic. I know one person may look at this and say it's a sign of abject neglect, you know, and it just looks absolutely horrible. But to me, I think that looks super cool. And having a living, growing filter, that's, you know, again, I don't care about the mulm. You know, let the mulm build up in there all at once. I don't care. I breed snails in here for food. It doesn't, you know, the mulm in there is just where they live. It's an inch deep in the corner. So that doesn't bother me. I don't need the filter to pick that up. But it'll start stinking if there's not some water flow and some circulation. And, you know, it has to be a living tank. And so having this little filter running like this and having it flow through living Java moss like that is probably a far better filter than the way I used to run the tank. So I'm quite happy with that. Of course, I have to come over here and lift the lid to see anything. But once a day, I come over here and lift this lid to either feed the tank or to pick some snails out of there to feed other fish with those snails. So I'm really happy about that. Again, I'll probably shoot a standalone video just about that for anybody that doesn't, you know, catch it here. So moving on to my 40-gallon native tank. I did a water change on this one today. I got the glass wiped down inside and out, and I also replaced the filter pad in my pump in the back. My regular viewers may remember that the pump that is in this tank used to be in my waterfall tank, and the same sort of apparatus, that homemade filter getup that I put on there, is still intact. So this tank actually does have filter fiber blocking, you know, the mulm and detritus and stuff like that. My waterfall tank now has a bigger pump on it, but I never got around to putting any kind of filtration on it. It just has that little screen, you know, the little plastic grate on the front of it, and whatever stuff collects on that sort of acts as a filter, maybe to keep any fish from getting caught in it. But I've never had a problem with fish getting caught in those things. So there you go. I got no filter at all on the pump in my waterfall tank. This tank does have a filter in front of the pump, and that's why, even though I just put the new filter pad in there, you can see it's actually not flowing all that steadily again. I don't know if it got clogged up pretty quickly when I did the water change, got all the water swirled around. Didn't bother with the gravel vac or anything. This is not really one of those kind of tanks I can do that with. I did find it interesting when I came up to the tank, my little darter and the sculpin both swam right up to the front glass, almost as though they were expecting it to be feeding time. And for a brief moment, I felt bad for them. I felt like it was the fish equivalent of Stockholm syndrome, because I am their captor after all, and yet they're all excited to see me coming running up to the glass. Of course, they had a different thing coming today when I got in there with my hand and started wiping the glass down. But they'll be back later when I get in here to feed them this evening. So again, we got some little fishy Stockholm syndrome going on in there. But that's pretty much it that's going on with the native tank here. If you haven't seen an update since I've done it, I don't know if I talked about this in my last Round the World update. Again, I know a lot of people don't watch these, but a lot of people only watch these videos. And I did go out in the yard a little while ago, and I found some cool sticks that I liked, and I put them across the top. They sort of break the lines up a little bit. They create some more shadow and texture visually inside the tank. And personally, I'm just a fan of lichen. I think lichen looks really, really cool. And these sticks have lichen of various sorts all over them. And when you actually really start getting in there and looking, I got, you know, half a dozen different colors. I got purples, blues, greens, browns, tans. Really, really good looking stuff. So again, I don't know who gets excited about looking at like bark and lichen and stuff, but I do, and I think that looks awesome, and it's my tank, so that's what matters. So moving on to my 125 gallon tank. This is the one, oh, before I forget, let's come right here into the corner. Apanageton. This is Apanageton. This whole plant right there is Apanageton. Did not even know that was in there. So that makes sense as to why floating up in this corner and probably even stuck to one of these stalks was an offspring, a little baby Apanageton. So I don't know if that's Apanageton or Apanageton or whatever. I'm not exactly sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's what it is. And so yeah, that's mystery solved. There's no big mystery as to where it came from. It came from right there in my 125. I just didn't even know it was in there. So there you go. Anyway, got in here today and I finally pulled the air stones out. I'm done with the ChemiClean treatment. In fact, I was done with the ChemiClean treatment a while ago. I didn't bother pulling the stones out because I was going to sort of make a project out of this tank. I was going to shoot video and get in there and really give it a big haircut because it really needs one. But I didn't. I actually decided, just one thing led to another. I literally just pulled the air stones out, and when I did that, I said, well, if I'm going to shoot a video around the world, I might as well wipe the glass down. That only takes a couple minutes, you know, and that's what started it. I wound up doing a bunch of work in a bunch of tanks, which is good. I needed to. But this tank got a big water change. Did not change the filter in this one, but I did change it recently, and I'm not too worried about the filter in this one. I am still going to get in here and do more work later. I do still want to make a project out of this, but I decided it's probably best to do this in multiple stages rather than try to do it all at once. So today I focused on getting the glass cleaned off, which we'll have to do again, I'm sure. But while I was in there, I got the tank looking nice and pretty by getting the glass cleaned off, and I focused on getting mulm out of the tank. This tank really, really collects the mulm. And one of the things I did when I set this tank up is, since I can't vac, and whether that's superficially or deep, it doesn't matter. There's so many places I can't really access in the bottom of this tank, that the way I set it up was with a strong clockwise current. So the front of the tank's going to be flowing this way, and you can see my big power head in the back blowing the water that way. And What it does is it brings the water out here and it sort of drops all the sediment and stuff, and I've got these rocks to trap and collect it, and I got these areas that I can stick my gravel vac in. And I actually designed it that way. I've set up other tanks in a similar fashion, and I had a lot of success with doing it that way. The problem I have with this tank is that I've got so much plants and stuff in here that I don't get enough circulation to ever get the stuff all the way back to this end. I do get a lot of stuff that collects there, but I don't get the lion's share of it. Most of it gets trapped other places. So today I started by vacuuming that out, and then I wiped the glass down, and while I was wiping it, I started doing the hand swooshes, and I started, just working it down, and I went through all the leaves, and I went through all this stuff, and I worked it down, and I lifted this woodwork up and down a bunch of times. This piece of wood actually has a cavity underneath of it that I can stick the entire end of the gravel vac, the handle part and all, will fit down underneath of this piece of wood. So you can imagine the amount of mulm that gets trapped underneath of there. So I lifted that up and down a bunch of times to blow a bunch of the stuff out. And you get the idea. I kept doing this. I kept getting it down this end and working it down this end. And I can't believe how much stuff I finally got out of the tank without ever having to remove the gravel vac. I would just stop swooshing it by the time I got through here. I'd get it through the crypt in the middle, and then I would just kind of leave it alone, and it would do its thing, and it would settle, and I'd come down after wiping a little more glass down, and it would look like a snowdrift down here of mulm, and I'd vac all that out, and I'd come down and I'd do another big thing, and I'd give it a few minutes, and it would all just look like a snowdrift down here. And I did that a bunch of times to get this tank nice and clean. So that was stage one, and we'll do that again the next time I get in here, because there's still tons of mulm in here to get out, believe me. But the next time we get in here, we're going to go and start doing the whackety chop and give this tank a haircut. I really need to allow for more water flow, more water circulation around in this tank. So that is what is going on here in the 125. This tank is going to have a little bit of chatting about. This is my 20-gallon angelfish tank, and I know it looks absolutely terrible. That's kind of the point, but we'll get to that in a minute. So if you can see all that crud and growth and all that stuff, the back glass has a lot of it on there. That is all cyanobacteria. This is my real problem tank when it comes to cyanobacteria. But before anybody goes any further, I know this is not the best way to look at it, especially when you're looking at a brown background like that. This is somewhere between 5 and 10 parts per million nitrate. If you really want to go wild and call it 15, I don't care. You can call it 15 because, again, whatever, it's 15, but when I looked at it on the chart, it was between 5 and 10. I couldn't decide which one, so we'll call it 10. Again, if you want to go wild, we'll call it 15. The point is, that's the only measure of the water I can show you to reassure you that despite what this tank looks like, the fish are just fine in here. The water is just fine. It's not dirty. It's not, neglected and ignored. I haven't really physically gotten in there and removed a ton of the physical material, but the tank itself is still maintained in the sense that the water quality is good. And again, showing you a nitrate test is the only test I could show you that would give you an idea of that. I could show you the water hardness. I don't know if that would mean much to you. I could show you the pH. Again, I don't know if that would mean much to you. So showing you the nitrate is what I can show you that will say, okay, well, that's obviously I'm staying on top of the water changes or whatever. So the reason this tank looks as bad as it does, and it looked a lot worse last week, believe me, I got in here and all this bright green you can see, I got in there and physically removed a bunch of the cyanobacteria. I'm not going to demonstrate it now, but I want to, well, again, I'm not really sure why this tank just goes crazy with the cyanobacteria no matter what I do to it. So the next time I treat this, I'm going to treat it. We're going to just slam it, and I'm going to keep treating it until the cyanobacteria is dead. And then we're going to see what happens as far as how it comes back. And I want to show you that whole process. I want to get all that on video, how I get in there. You can see I got big mats of it growing down here. I want to show you all that. I want to, and so because of that, I'm leaving it alone. Again, this isn't my job. This is my hobby. The fish are fine. The water's clear. The water's clean. I do water changes regularly. I just topped it off today. I just changed the filter a few days ago. Trust me, the fish are fine. It just looks bad, and if that bothers you, that's your problem, because it doesn't bother me, and since it's my tank, I'm not worried about it. I don't care. We'll get to this when we get to it, and it'll be a video where I can show everybody what doing a really, like, let's start from this and let's get this tank cleaned up and see what it takes. And so that's what we're going to do soon, I hope. You know, again, I'll get to it when I get to it. I just got to be in the right mood and have the time, or be bored, or whatever. We'll get to it when we get to it. So again, 10, you know, parts per million, 15 if you want to go wild and call it 15 parts per million nitrate. The fish are fine. Don't worry about it. It just looks ugly. Moving on to my final tank in this video. We're finally getting around towards the end of it. This is another tank that I really need to get in here and do some maintenance on. I have no idea what the nitrate count in this tank is. I don't really even see any point in doing a nitrate test on this tank. I'm sure it's just red, and you know, once it's red, it's red. You know, the varying degrees of red are almost impossible to separate out from each other, so I'm not too worried about it. Butterbean looks fine. His behavior is perfectly normal. I actually caught him the other day chasing a bunch of these little guppies around. Really happy with the way my guppies are turning out. They're starting to get some color. They're definitely starting to notice, you know, when I'm at the tank and everything. You can see they've all gathered up front, waiting for feeding time. I did see Butterbean chasing one the other day, so I don't know if he chases them and catches them and eats them. But let's see, I got 3, 6, 7 that I can see. Yeah, I'm seeing 7 of them in there now, and I know I put more than 7 in there to start with. I probably put 12 or maybe 15 of them in there to start with. So, probably not out of the question to think that Butterbean is responsible for why we don't have 12 or 15 of them in there anymore. Although, that one just swam out of the Java fern right here. I'm not sure if I'd counted that one already or not. It looks really small, so I don't think I'd counted that one. So, who knows? Maybe there's a few more hiding in there, but whatever. They seem to be doing fine. Fish that can live in brackish water don't really have a big issue with dealing with total dissolved solids, as long as those total dissolved solids are not, you know, arsenic or lead or, you know, heavy metals or whatever. The nitrate isn't going to bother them. Having a little bit of dissolved salts in there, you know, whether they got a little bit of extra you know, phosphates in the tank or whatever, that's not going to bother these fish at all, so I'm not concerned about it. I do very infrequent water changes on this tank, and honestly, the last time I did a filter change on this tank is beyond memory. I bet it's been a year since I've done a filter change on this tank, and it's always been because when I look, I've got plenty of water flow coming out of the filter. And after my experience with my 125 today, or my New World tank today, I'm willing to bet, I bet inside that filter, it's the same way. I bet it's completely packed closed, and it's just got a little channel where the water's flowing up through it, and that's why I've still got good water flow. But I bet it's been a year since I've looked in the filter on this tank, so maybe that'll be a video coming up one of these days. For those of you old enough to remember, it'll be like a opening of Al Capone's vault. We'll find out what's in there today. But although it'll probably be a lot more exciting than what was actually in Al Capone's vault. So anyway, on that oddball note, I'm going to say thanks for watching. We've made it all the way around the world. I got it done in under 40 minutes, so I guess that's pretty good. It's better than I thought I was going to do, honestly. I thought 45 would be about it. So there you go, everybody. My longest around the world update yet. But I feel like we covered a lot of stuff today. So once again, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed that. Make sure you're subscribed, and I will see you real soon on the next one.